Okay, so I've got recording on. It's supposed to be going to the cloud. Here we go. All right. So with the first slide, folks, this just has kind of an outline of everything I'm going to run through. I will let you know kind of what I would suggest that you highlight or kind of have as standouts with the information. But this is pretty comprehensive. We're going to be going through about 48 or 49 different slides. So to kind of start off, and I'll come back to some of these images as well, because they have to do with cleavages and issues of rural versus urban, et cetera. So first of all, with Nigeria, the most important thing to know with Nigeria, especially for the exam, is that the differences between people and the cleavages that exist are deeper and more distinct than any of the other countries that we've really talked about, even more so than Russia or China, and Mexico as well. This is mostly because of Nigeria's colonial past, with the UK having held Nigeria as a colony. And as a result of that colonizing experience over the course of about 100+ years, groups of people from completely different backgrounds with completely different languages and history were lumped together all in this one territory that eventually became a country. So one of the biggest challenges that Nigeria has had over time is how to become and remain a unified country, despite having very clear divisions between Christian and Muslim, three main different ethnic groups, regional differences in terms of geographic features and wealth. It's been a real challenge, but it does seem that in the last 20 years, that with Nigeria having had three peaceful transitions of power, that things are stabilizing, although there were challenges during COVID, and I'll come back to those kind of at the end. But it does seem like we've got a process of possible democratic consolidation happening, but they are nowhere near where Mexico was, say, in the 1980s or 1990s. The country has a long way to go. So typically in the past, until the early 2000s, these divisions, these cleavages were resolved through the use of force. And it goes back to what we talked about with Eric Liu, and authoritarianism. So we've had dictatorships, military coups d'etats, and revolutions. I'm going to move through this one fairly quickly, but what's important here, folks, is this, that there were 8 constitutions between 1914 and 1995. And Nigeria is not independent until 1960. So from the British all the way up through the mid-90s, there's been a big question of, is constitutionalism, and constitutionalism is the concept of following a guiding set of principles written down in a document that encodes rule of law and branches government. All right. This guiding set of principles of constitutionalism has been one that Nigeria's really struggled with. Military leaders, civilian leaders have suspended constitutional privileges, principles, have violated human rights, have used national police forces to suppress protests, and again, military coups d'etats and or revolutions. It's a young country, the youngest, other than, if we don't count the Soviet Union, with Russia, okay, which would technically be the youngest country. But Nigeria, if we do include the Soviet Union, is the youngest or newest country of the AP6. That means establishing legitimacy has been really challenging. We get fragmentation, where there's a tendency to have cleavages along ethnic, regional, or religious lines lead to a desire to secede. There's going to be a civil war in the 1970s that I'll mention later. There's also been extensive challenges with corruption, whether under military rule and a military dictatorship or under civilian rule with elected officials. The question of taxes being paid and government services being rendered has frequently been not resolved. People have been frequently very frustrated in Nigeria about government services not being provided. And that's everything from healthcare to pensions to infrastructure projects. The name right here that's important is Ibrahim Babangida, who is the military dictator between 1985 and 1993. He will eventually be elected president after 2000. Okay, so and there's a peaceful transition of power when it happens. So that's pretty significant that Nigeria will eventually change to the point that we're able to have a former military dictator not only get elected, but then engage in a peaceful transition of power through elections. Okay, the trade connections, the past history with Islam, that I think is more connected to what you would have learned in Global 1-2, hopefully with like the kingdoms of Mali, etc. But what is important here is the emergence of Sharia law as a political principle as a result of the connection between the House of Fulani, people who live in northern Nigeria and who in greater numbers identify as Muslim. Okay. The concept again that we'll come back to, and this has to do with, if you might remember, we have Guanxi and the nomenclatura process in the Soviet Union with nomenclatura, and then Guanxi in China. In Nigeria, there's a similar structure of elite recruitment and connections known as prebendalism that I'll define a little later for you, can come up on the exam, but simply describe prebendalism as kinship ties, that people's connection to family and also ethnic, or what would in the past have been described as tribal groups, that those connections can supersede perhaps larger political allegiances or lead to additional corruption. There's a contrast between the centralized state governance. We have a federalist system. The division of power geographically between a capital, which is a federal district, and states is exactly like the United States. But there's also local governance that's very much connected to these kinship networks that people tend to follow, and that it impacts how people experience politics in Nigeria. I'm going to pause for just 1 second